Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the New Energy Advancement Hub, which is a platform offering cutting-edge research, innovative trainings, and business games to drive your successful energy transition. And today we are here to discuss a fascinating topic. It's power shift from Atlantic to Indo-Pacific, the evolving global energy order. I'm sure you all noticed that the global energy landscape is undergoing a dramatic shift, with economic and energy influence steadily moving from the Atlantic to Indo-Pacific. Emerging economies like China and India are increasingly shaping the global energy order, while traditional powers in the OECD struggle to balance energy security with their climate goals. So this trend is expected to continue pushing the international community to reconsider completely the frameworks that have governed energy policy for decades. And in order to discuss all these extremely interesting topics, we've invited fantastic speaker, Narendra Taneja, chairman of the Independent Energy Policy Institute, a good old friend of mine. Dr. Narendra Taneja is a global thought leader on energy geopolitics, especially focused on the dynamics between the global north and the global south, though I know he doesn't like this definition. He serves as a chairman of the Independent Energy Institute and presides over the World Energy Policy Summit. And his expertise in energy security, governance, and climate issues is absolutely incredible. He holds multiple academic qualifications in economics, policy, and international affairs. And his favorite wording, his favorite phrase is, "Energy is not my profession, it's my passion." I love it. Narendra, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your time. And I'm looking
Thanks for having me, Tatiana.
And I'm looking forward for really open discussion. Yeah, there are no right answers, and the questions are pretty tough, to be frank. So the simple question that I wanted to ask in the beginning, it's not probably very polite, but it sounds like, what the hell is going on? Yeah, what's happening with the global energy order these days? Yeah, and what happens with this balance of energy security, climate security, economic wealth? How would you define the status quo right now?
Well, it's a very interesting landscape that we look around the world. And if you look at the history of energy, I mean, of course, we can go deeper, but let's say 1970s. In the 1970s, after the oil embargo and everything, we saw the emergence of a kind of global energy order, which was kind of, created ripples. And of course, a lot of disruption. And the result was that many new organizations were born, many new visions were born. I'm an International Energy Agency is part of it, and of course, and several others. And then, in the process, things went on because there was Soviet Union, there was the United States of America, and there was some non-aligned movement and so on and so forth. So there were kind of multiple energy orders functioning. No big collision, but they were functioning. Let me give you an example of that. Everybody knows about OPEC, knows about IEA and all that. For instance, in the old days when this was going on, India used to import crude oil from the Soviet Union. But physically, that oil never came from the Soviet Union. It always came from Iraq. So there was a kind of tripartite, agreement between these three countries. But India's agreement was with the Soviet Union, but the oil was being, exported by Saddam Hussein's regime in Iraq. So that was also an order, in a way, energy order, and it was very smooth. It functioned well, and most of people in India didn't even notice the oil was actually physically coming from Iraq. But then came 1991, the collapse of the Soviet Union, and then we saw the emergence of the United States as a kind of the superpower. And the entire, if you look at, for instance, the world order, mainly the energy order was more or less dominated by American dollar, very forcefully, and the United States. And that brought about kind of, I wouldn't say stability, but there were no big challenges. So you can call it stability. Many experts call it stability. And the world kind of enjoyed it, quote unquote, according to many experts. And it went on for almost 3 decades. And then we saw the emergence of China. We have seen emergence of, India. We have seen emergence of countries like Indonesia, medium powers like, Vietnam and Turkey, Saudi Arabia, kind of looking at the world with its own glasses, its own eyes, so kind of independent. Iran has its own worldview and so on and so forth. So the result today is that we see this massive disruption. So the energy order that we saw since the collapse of the Soviet Union, 1991, is gone. It's out the window now. It's not there. And then Ukraine happened, and since Ukraine, we have seen, for instance, the Russia is still holding on to its global market share, exporting oil, and India being among the largest, buyer of that oil. China is doing that, and China is own worldview when it comes to energy. Russia has its own worldview. India has its own worldview. Iran has its own worldview, and of course, the United States has its own worldview, and the Western Europe its own worldview. NATO, with focus on a kind of military alliances, and is focusing a lot on energy. To me, it looks like NATO's second most important focus today is energy. So we have seen kind of emergence of kind of informally, some people call it energy NATO. So it's a very different world altogether when suddenly energy is kind of clubbed with security and energy is clubbed with climate. So it's a bit confusing, but at the same time, we see kind of this kind of order emerging on the landscape. At the same time, we have seen that countries like, market, look at India, and there's about 1.4 billion energy consumers. China has roughly also 1.4 billion energy consumers. And look at Indonesia. If you put Indonesia, India, and China, these three countries together, I mean, you're talking of more than 3 billion energy consumers in this part of the world. And I'm not even talked about Vietnam. I'm not talking about Bangladesh or Pakistan or, ASEAN countries and others. So 3 billion, just these three countries. Now compare that with, countries on two sides of the pond called Atlantic, United States and Western Europe. And if you include even Japan and other OECD countries, you're still talking about 1.6 billion energy consumers. So 1.6 billion energy consumers versus 3 billion in these three countries alone. If you look at the Asia as a whole, you're talking of 4.5 billion energy consumers. And the difference is that energy consumers in the Atlantic world, they're not that hungry. They're mature consumers. The market is mature. They're not asking for more. While in this part of the world, when you look at, Indo-Pacific or Greater Asia, the energy consumers are hungry. And they're not only hungry, you have more than 1 billion people who are like below energy poverty line. And you have widespread energy poverty as well in parts of Asia, in part of, big parts of Africa and Latin America. So this is the landscape now. And this landscape means that, that the, energy world order that we saw following the collapse of the Soviet Union is out. At the same time, the new, energy order has yet to emerge. The reasons for that are simple, but the strongest reason is that Western Europe and Canada and North America in particular, this club, the Atlantic Club, they just refuse to see the realities. The world is changing and they are refusing to see it, let alone acknowledge it. So the result is when you go to Western Europe or America, Canada, that part of the world, I mean, the world is only about 1.6 billion OECD energy consumers. But at the same time, when you look at the cold statistics, cold numbers, the largest number of energy consumers are here in Indo-Pacific. Call it Indo-Pacific, call it Asia-Pacific, call it Greater Asia. They're here. That's where the demand is. So let me give you an example. Look at China, for instance. China is, after the United States, is the most important country when it comes to energy. The second largest energy consumer. And at the same time, when the Chinese economy, there's some question marks, so it's kind of not doing well. You can see the effect of that on oil prices. India is third largest consumer of oil, second largest importer of oil, second largest. We are consuming roughly 5.5 million barrels of oil every day. And in years to come, India is probably going to consume maybe 7.5 million barrels a day. That's oil alone. I'm not talking about gas. I'm not talking about coal and other sources, and solar and other sources of energy. So that's the reality. And then you have Vietnam, you have Pakistan, you have Bangladesh, you have Myanmar, you have the entire ASEAN, and you have Iran, you have several other countries, this part of the world alone. I've not even talked about Africa, which is now home to 1.5 billion people, or Latin America for that matter. So this is the reality. The problem is that when it comes to all global narratives on energy, and all global narratives which are kind of closely associated with energy, for instance, climate, all those narratives are still made in Western Europe and America and Canada, the Atlantic Club. They still control, they occupy, the cockpit, 100% space. They don't let anyone come in. And all the narratives are built there, disseminated from there. And if you agree or if you disagree with them, they say, oh, you don't believe in a kind of stability in the markets, or they ask you many questions. Sometimes, they say, oh, you don't believe in the a kind of order which is based on rules and things and stuff like that, because they want a status quo. They don't want any change. India may have emerged, China may have emerged, Vietnam may have emerged, Indonesia may have emerged, other countries may be emerging. And actually the gravity center is not only shifting, it's kind of already shifted from Atlantic to Indo-Pacific, and they refuse to acknowledge it. And the funny and the interesting part is when we talk of the Indo-Pacific in the context of energy, the United States is still a constant because United States is part of the Indo-Pacific. So it's a constant. So, and it is even then, for instance, even when experts, people like me say, oh, United States is there. When we talk of Indonesia, United States is still the largest economy in the Indo-Pacific. Even then, they don't want to talk about, they don't want to buy into the narrative, because they're very comfortable with the narrative that, for instance, because the narrative serves them very well. They control more majority of, intergovernmental global organization. They control the United Nations. And at the same time, the kind of global, whatever the order is there. So the challenge that today is for countries like, India, China, Indonesia, many countries in our part of the world, is that the reality has changed. Unless you recognize that the reality has changed, the world is now, that's how the world looks like. How are you going to build a way forward? It's like going to a doctor and you don't talk about your disease. The doctor can't help you. You have to first accept that, look, doctor, I've got this problem, and doctor going to give it a name. May call it tuberculosis or call it cancer or whatever. Only then the doctor can help. So you have to accept the new reality. And the new reality is the global gravity center, especially when it comes to energy, is no longer in Atlantic. It's no longer Western Europe, America, and Canada. It's here in Indo-Pacific. And that includes the United States. So we have to accept it, and then accordingly, we have to start working, building a new energy world order where the gravity center is in Indo-Pacific, but at the same time, the whole world matters. Now, how do we do that? Do we need more institutions for that? Do we need to create a kind of intergovernmental new organization on the lines of UNESCO or WTO or World Health Organization, something like that? Because under the UN umbrella, we've got organizations for practically everything except energy. And now when you talk to the West, they say, oh, we have got International Energy Agency. Why do you need a new organization? But look, most countries, there's an organization of OECD countries. It's not an organization for countries like India, China, Vietnam, Indonesia, and others. So the time has come now when we, A, recognize the fact that the gravity center has moved. B, we recognize the fact the world has changed. So therefore, we need an organization which has kind of got energy in its DNA, energy in a more comprehensive form, maybe even associate climate with it, and also recognize the fact that gravity center in this part of the world, majority of energy consumers, that's like 6.4 billion energy consumers, are not part of the global north, and that this is the reality. And then the north, the global north and the global south, or Indo-Pacific and the Atlantic countries, we sit together across the table, accept the new reality, reverse the map, rework, the international organization, including the United Nations and associated organizations, so that we can build a better and a safer world. This is what we need to do. But this, unfortunately, we're not able to actually make any headway move in that direction, just because The West, Canada, Australia, also America, they're very comfortable because this kind of order works for them very well. Status quo is what they want because it works for them. But the problem is the world elsewhere is changed very fast. So unless we sit across the table with them and try to build a new energy order, then what will happen is things will change, and probably the world will be forced to create a new world order, whether the West likes it or not.
Thank you, Narendra. That was really very comprehensive and extremely challenging, I would say. Yeah, so it's challenging the status quo, the current world energy order. I see, frankly, that many of my colleagues in the US, in Europe, are also admitting already that the world has changed and that it's necessary to recognize these changes. Yeah, as you said, there's going to doctor and have a fair diagnostics. But what do you think? So as far as I understood, if it will not be admitted voluntarily, then most likely ignorance will lead to like some conflicts or some reshaping of the global order without, permission of those who are now controlling it. That seems quite frightening. To be frank, yeah, because any change of this scale and this magnitude might be problematic. And, I thought that even the current trade wars, which started with all these EVs and batteries, they are a pretty good indication of this process already happening. Okay, thanks God, these are trade wars, not military conflicts, but we are also in the middle of several huge military conflicts, probably the biggest during the last 80 years. Yeah, Russia and Ukraine, the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. There are more than 110 conflicts, military conflicts ongoing right now around the world, which is not helping stability. But back to this shift. Yeah, and by the way, I would like to encourage our audience who is watching us in YouTube and in LinkedIn. Guys, don't hesitate. Please write down your questions in the commentaries. I will transfer them to Narendra. So use this chance to ask the questions. But meanwhile, I will ask my questions. So in the perception, so why the existing world energy order is not sufficient, is not good for the emerging economies and developing markets. What is different in the perceptions between the Western perspective, let's call it this way, and in the Pacific perspective? What is missing in the current world energy order?
Well, that's a very, very interesting question, Tatiana. I mean, if you look at it, for instance, let's go back to Dubai, COP28. There, if you see very carefully, it was a climate summit, scientists specializing on climate, politicians specializing on climate, because that's a climate summit. But the happiest moment in that summit was when they took a decision on something they were not really expert on. That was energy. That you need to move away from oil and gas and, transitioning away and so on and so forth. And they struggled and struggled and struggled. And when they got there, when they got the countries to agree, they were celebrating it. My point is that, if you have to take a decision on energy, something which is probably the biggest part of the global economy. If you look at the global economy as a cake, the biggest chunk is actually energy. I understand energy, and it's important to understand that, energy is like any other economic activity. I agree. But the point here is that you are taking such a decision, such a fundamental decision, such a critical decision in a climate summit. Why can't we have a summit on energy? Look at some of the realities. For instance, that there are 3 billion energy poor in the world. 3 billion. The majority of countries are energy deficit. The cost of energy, the business of energy and everything, why can't we look at more comprehensively at the same time? When you take a decision, let's say on energy in a climate summit, these are two different worlds altogether. You require energy experts can't become climate experts overnight. But that was the impression that one got when we were there. And before actually Dubai, like in other COP summit, big oil and gas companies or the coal company or the energy company, they were not even allowed to enter the room where decisions will be being taken on that. So point I'm trying to drive home is just this. The Western part of the world or OECD countries, they have one view of energy, especially when it comes to future. They think that renewable energy is the only way forward, the only way forward. And they don't explain why, but they say that's the only way forward. And they are pushing that agenda as aggressively as they can. And if you don't agree with them on that agenda, you don't believe in XYZ. You don't believe in clean environment. You don't care about your children. You don't care about your grandchildren. And so you're given long lectures on climate. They completely forget the history of climate, who is actually responsible for what's happening in terms of that's a different debate altogether. But the point here is that the question that comes into mind for a lot of people in the global south, why are they doing that? Why are they really pushing for renewable energy agenda so aggressively? What is the reason? Is that because they want that will help them to hold on to the status quo? Is that because that would allow them to hold on to kind of the leadership, the role in the cockpit, the global energy cockpit, because they are pretty advanced in terms of solution, whether it's technology or practices or even capital? Is that the reason? Or they think that way they can basically delay the entire process, delay in the sense where the other countries will be basically forced to, to re-engineer the whole thing. And that means that, developing economy, majority of them will have to wait for another 20, 30 years before they can catch up with the global norm. Is that the kind of the reason? And the second thing people are asking is that, when you talk to the oil and gas biggies in Western Europe, in the United States of America, in Canada, when you talk to the biggies, the CEOs, the board members and everything, they all acknowledge the fact they can't be kind of overnight switch over. We can't do that. They understand it. In private, they actually, open their heart to you. They say, what the hell is going on? Because you see, oil and gas and coal, these sources of energy will continue to be relevant and important for global economy for years to come. Of course, the renewable is important and must. And my own view is that all these big oil and gas and coal companies over a period of time would actually transform and would become the top or the largest, energy companies in the world, mainly focusing on renewable. They will go where the business is. But the point is, are we talking of transition? Are we talking of switchover? Many in the West, they want switchover. And the result is that you go to schools, you go to universities, you go to meetings and conferences in Western part of the world. And if you talk about oil, they will talk about gas, and you say, look, like in India, the 80% of energy is still fossil fuel, or globally, 80% energy is still 80.60% energy is still fossil fuel. When you put out these numbers of the cold facts on the screen, they want to hit you because they just think that what nonsense is this? They want the world to abandon fossil fuels completely and go for it, not really realizing it's not possible. Maybe for one country or two countries or three countries in the global north. But what about the global south, where you have 3 billion energy poor? It's not possible. Of course, if they have some silver bullet or platinum bullet or something they can pass on to countries in the global south, and we'll be very happy to try it if it works. But there is no such bullet. There is no such platinum bullet. So that's the challenge. So result is that when you live in this kind of environment and then how do we kind of both global north and the global south, or the rich and the poor, they come on the same table so that they can find a solution. Efforts are there. People like me, we talk about these issues. But the problem is that when you go and discuss energy in conferences, in meeting rooms, in seminars in the global north, they think that it's basically those meetings are like echo chambers. They're basically talking about their own interest. While the 6.4 billion people who live in the global south, or 4.5 billion people who live in our part of the world, sometimes you really wonder, do we exist for them or not?
Narendra, I've got a question. So you having this very deep perspective in the global south, yeah, could you please explain a bit more in detail? So you've described the Western perspective. Yeah, I agree. Climate is absolutely dominant there. For the perspective from the global south, yeah, I see. I mean, you've mentioned several times strong pollution in Indian cities, and that it's not really good. And I see that many people in the developing economies are also quite worried about climate issues. Yeah, and they are experiencing, like in Pakistan, all these terrible floodings. Yeah, so they face the direct consequences already. At the same time, India is facing enormous growth of solar. Yeah, it's really incredible speed. China is actually, it is China the leader of all new energy these days, whether we are talking about solar or electric vehicles or batteries, whatever. So how do these different angles are actually getting together and balanced in the perspective of the growing economies? You've mentioned that OECD countries, they are mature. Actually, their energy demand is not growing that much, except for new AI and data centers demand. Yeah, but for the growing economies, how to balance all these contradictory tasks?
Well, this is a very interesting question. First of all, we have to appreciate that when we talk of global south, we are not talking of one geography with very similar characteristics or features. That's not the case. Argentina is global south, Chile is global south, India is global south, China is global south, entire Africa is global south. But these are three different, almost like three different planets. Look at Africa. Africa is so beautiful. And Africa is still, there's so much of nature. The same goes for countries like Brazil and Argentina and so on and so forth. So they have their issues are totally different. The problem is that, when we listen to some of these narratives which originate from the West or the global North, those narratives are basically like this, that look, this is the way they want the transition to happen. This is the way they want, for instance, the renewable and the green energy landscape to look like in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, and all that. They talk of milestones 2030, 2040, 2050, 2070. That's what they discuss. My point is, they're not only the point of by a lot of people in the global south is that, but that's not possible. Each country, like India, you talked about China. China is developing renewable energy and going for a transition with Chinese characteristics. What works for them? For instance, when it comes to, you talked about solar panels and all that, kind of, they have now established a kind of capacity, manufacturing capacity, which actually requires them to export those things to other markets in order to sustain their industry. In India, for instance, we are a fossil fuel economy. China is also, by the way, still fossil fuel economy. But India, for instance, look at the kind of push that we have given to renewable energy, mainly solar. I mean, it's like a grassroots solar power revolution that you can see across the country. Grassroots, huge success. And we are well on our way to become a kind of solar power superpower in time to come. And we have got our milestone destination, everything kind of, all lined up. That said, at the same time, we will, because looking at the size of our population, this transition is going to happen with Indian characteristics, which may be very different from China, very different from United States of America, very different from Germany. So China, global south, they are doing it depending on what they have and what their ambitions are, depending on their kind of own limitations, strengths and capabilities and capacities. That's kind of transition with Chinese characteristics. In India, what is happening is with Indian characteristics. Similarly, I'm sure that Bangladesh would like to do it, but with their own characteristics. On Africa, which is so blessed in terms of nature, natural beauty and everything, they're going to do it with their own characteristics. The point is that that's what needs to be appreciated. And wherever the global north or the rich countries, they think they have technology or they have capital or they have expertise or they have, managerial skill, they should be looking at different countries and then basically going and providing the kind of, partnership based on the ground realities that particular country. Let me give you an example of India. In India, we are a huge country. When we look at the transition that's already happening here, For instance, southern part of the country, with the peninsular India, that's there the developments are with the characteristics based on that geography, that area. When you go to Kashmir, northern part of the country, that's with the local characteristic. In northern India, do you think the countries in Germany or the United States, they have the expertise or they have got knowledge that they will basically be able to guide? And that's not how it works. You have to, so the whole narrative, the whole debate needs to be democratized. It's not democratic. We need to democratize the whole debate on renewable energy and climate change, and especially when it comes to the climate security. We need to democratize it. Right now, what we witness, what we see is kind of climate authoritarianism. That global north, we are rich, we have resources, we have think tanks, we have universities, we have money, we control the UN, we control most of the global organization, we control majority of media organization which disseminate, all the BBCs, the world, the world. And so listen to us. If you don't listen to us, we are going to name you, we are going to shame you. That's not how we build a safe future for the planet. We should think in terms of the planet. We should think in terms of, what is good for the whole world. And more, we should be democratic in the way we look at these issues. If you look at in a democratic manner, then you have to recognize the first fact is that 6.4 billion people live in the global south. So we have to respect their voice. We have to respect, how they look at these issues. What happened in countries like India and China, Indonesia and Brazil, these are large countries. So even in big, platform, they're able to assert, they're able to say, look, this is how we should be going forward. But the majority of countries in the global south are economically weak. They don't have the kind of resources. Some of them, they don't have the right diplomatic skills or negotiating skills. So the result, and there are a large number of such countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. So what happened that these countries really find very difficult. They're not able to speak because they just don't think they're strong enough, because they're so dependent on some of these countries in the global south for aid, for technology, for bails out, and things like that. So the result is that we have watched these things. So what I'm saying is that global north need to recognize one thing. Renewable energy is the future. No doubt on that, 100%. Global warming, 100%. It's a huge challenge to humanity. We need to go for kind of renewable energy, green energy, and fast track the transition in our own interests. Countries like India are very densely populated. We need to do it. We need to do it for our children, of our grandchildren. I think there is absolutely no difference of opinion on that. The question is, how do we do that? In the Western part of the world, they want to do it the way they like it, the way they think is right. But in the global south, countries like India, China, many other global, we want to do it in our own way. They may not like it, but we are more concerned about nature. We are more concerned about climate change. We are more concerned about global warming than they are, because we are the ones who are suffering probably more than them. So we know it. We care for our people. But the point is, the whole global debate, if we have to work as one word, then we need to democratize the whole process, so that the process is such wherever, for instance, if a country X in the global south needs something from global country Y in the global north, they can connect directly and work together on it. And we also need to create some global organization, like one global organization focusing on energy, like WHO or UNESCO and something like that. Second, we need at the same time, this organization should be addressing as far as the energy component of climate is concerned. It should not be the COP summit. It should be such an organization. We need to create new platforms, and these platforms should be democratic and should be representative. That means countries from the global south should be allowed to occupy more space in cockpits of such platforms.
Wow. So if I understand correctly, the discussion is not about the destination, it's about the path to this destination. So, and you are talking about more democratic, less dogmatic approach, yeah, a variability of fuel mixes, technological neutrality, potentially, yeah. So each country choosing its own path to decarbonization and to energy transition. And you are saying that at this stage we need a new international organization. You've mentioned like WTO or like or World Maritime Organization. So there are lots of them. I remember there were many attempts to create different global energy forums. Yeah. But why didn't it work? Yeah. And is the discussion about this new truly global international organization, which would represent all the parties involved, is it ongoing already, or is it just at the very beginning? How do you see this situation?
Well, to be very honest with you, I mean, there are some who've been kind of pushing for this, floating this idea, working this idea that includes me also for several years now. And yes, you are right when you say that multiple organizations are already there. Some focusing only on solar, like International Solar Alliance. There's Renewable Energy One in Abu Dhabi. There is International Energy Forum based in Riyadh, and there is of course International Energy Agency based in Paris, and there are a couple of others. But you see, but we have, if you look at the track record, if you look at and you look at the kind of the challenge in front of us, I think we need a strong organization. We need a truly global intergovernmental organization where, for instance, all issues pertaining to energy are addressed. For instance, when Ukraine happened, immediately the response of Western Europe was that they started building energy fortress for Europe. Energy fortress. So their concern was only Western Europe. How do we protect Western Europe? How do we secure energy for Western Europe? Now the question is, yes, they were doing whatever they were doing for their own people. So I'm not questioning that. What I'm questioning is that, if we had, or if there was a kind of international organization, then the issue would have gone there. And all countries, together probably would have found a solution, which would have worked for both. In this case, what happened when Europe started building energy fortress post-Ukraine, countries of the global south, they suffered. Oil prices went up, gas prices went up. You see the LNG ship, which was kind of about to anchor near Chittagong in Bangladesh, was only 1 day away from there, was actually diverted to Germany because Germany offered 3 times more money than poor Bangladesh could afford to pay. So that kind of thing, I'm just giving you one example. But when oil prices go up or the gas prices go up, in that kind of situation, is the poor consumer in the global south, is the poor consumer in Indonesia, India, in Argentina somewhere, or Bangladesh, he or she suffers. So what kind of energy justice are we talking about? So what I'm saying is that, when it comes to the renewable agenda, absolutely no disagreement. I think the entire world is on the same page, and we need to be on the same page. It's about protecting our planet. No question on that, no debate on that. It's only about how do we do that. The problem is that the Western countries, they want to do it their way. They think only they have ideas, only they have expertise, and only they can actually ensure that there is a kind of smooth transition. They think they're the kind of, favored children of God. That's how they look at it. But that's not the case. People in global south look at some of the oldest civilizations in the world, like China, like India, like Iran, like Iraq, and you go to Morocco, look at Egypt. These are all in the global south. The global north didn't exist when these were great civilizations. So we got to respect and democratize. Respect that you may be poor, but you are as smart as we are in the global north. You are as wise as we are. You don't have kind of monopoly on wisdom and expertise. I think that's what we need to do. But global organizations, all these organizations are there, small. But the point is, the time has come when we create a new organization, preferably headquartered somewhere in Asia, in the Indo-Pacific, Singapore, or Shanghai, or Bombay, or New Delhi, or Hanoi, or this part of the world. And it's a truly global organization, and it's kind of organization which can look at it energy more holistically, which includes the climate dimension of energy or energy dimension of climate, so that they can take considered and concerned view of how do we handle it. If you go to COP summits, and that's where the critical decisions are taken on energy, involving people who may not be expert on energy, I think that's not a very smart thing to do. The whole issue is very serious, The challenge is extremely serious. It's not about global north and global south. It's about humanity. It's about our future. It's about the future of our children and grandchildren. So this kind of attitude, arrogance in the global north that you see, where, for instance, they say, we know everything. That's not good. I think that they're very stubborn. This must go. And I think it can also, while we create this new organization for energy or create a new landscape for energy, so there can be a new sustainable global energy order with focus on renewable energy, but at the same time, we let other countries, the global south, build their own pathways when it comes to the transition, depending on their ground realities, depending on ground circumstances and the ground characteristics, so that we work all together and joining hands, whether you're global north or global south or within the global south, so that we can secure the world and make sure energy poverty across the world is eradicated. There is no energy poor. And at the same time, we can, fight with global warming and pollution and so on and so forth, all together, not global south, not global north, not rich, not poor. It sounds a bit idealistic, but unless we address this issue and we do it in the most democratic manner, we are compromising with the future of everyone. When things go wrong on the planet, the Mr. Disaster is not going to look at whether you're not global north or global south. If the world is not safe, the planet is not safe, it's unsafe for everybody.
I'm getting lots of questions, Narendra. You've inspired them. So one of the latest is, but does the Global South have a leverage to enforce such an organization? What do you think?
Well, the point is that, it's not about the leverage. It's about how can we work together. The fact remains that, the global north is still, just look at, for instance, Western Europe and the United States and Canada. You're talking of the OECD countries. The OECD put together, they are still more than 50% of the global GDP. Still, you see. So the point is that we know if you are that strong, that powerful, and plus you're home to great universities of the world, great laboratories of the world, banks of the world and everything. So the question is not the number. Is basically the real power. That real power will remain with them for a long time to go. We acknowledge, we know that. Now the question is that, how do we still, because when it's come to critical issues, I mean, I'm not saying that everyone in the global south should be able to afford a Rolls Royce or a Mercedes or a private jet. I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is that they have the right to energy. That is what is important. Their right to energy. They have sufficient energy so that the family can cook their food without polluting environment. They can, at the same time, the kids can study because they have access to electricity, and where they can basically, sleep nicely if it's too hot, it's too cold. That's all, the minimum. So we're talking of, kind of energy justice, one way or another. That is what I'm saying is, but in the process, of course, when we talk of philosophy, is a totally different thing. 200 years, 300 years from now, energy is going to be free. The world is going to look very different, but that's a totally different debate.
Hopefully, yeah. Currently, it doesn't look like that.
Challenges. We are talking about the immediate challenges. I mean, the question is that, Tatiana, when I see in my own country, or I see in other parts of the global south, and you see the child is asked to go to sleep early because they don't have access to electricity, or even if they have, they can't afford to pay the electricity bill. So the child wants to study till maybe midnight so that the child can score more marks in the exam. But the parents say, go to sleep because we can't afford to pay the electricity bill. You go to the global north, it's just the opposite. And we share the same planet. Now, I'm not a communist. I'm not a Marxist. But at the same time, the point is that can't we create a world where, for instance, there is a more energy justice, in the sense when you do what you do in Europe, you want to build an energy fortress for yourself, you want to secure yourself, but you expect a consumer in Indonesia or Bangladesh to pay for it. That is the case. That's what happens.
Yeah.
Because energy is a global business, global, trade. So those are the issues. So how do we address? It's tough. But the point is, we can start with democratizing the whole debate, and then we can start basically giving, have some concern for the people. Right now, my only worry is that when you go to the West, you talk to the Western country, you go to the global organization, all they're talking about is, renewable, green. Fine. But they don't talk about energy poverty. They don't talk about, for instance, that all these countries have the right to build their renewable energy pathways based on their own reality, based on their own wisdom, based on their own tradition, based on their own culture, based on their lifestyle, based on their literature, based on how they've lived there on that land for centuries and centuries. And why can't they respect it? Such a simple thing. That's my question.
Sounds fair. Very interesting question from Anil Kumar Mishra. As far as everyone knows, since a long time, that the energy perception always hovers over Middle East nations as they have the largest reserves. And the USA has already piled up so much oil in their field. My question is, if the USA releases the oil to market, then how will it impact the nations, especially to the Eastern world? I'm asking the questions just to have a comparison, as most of the countries are heading towards sustainability, like solar energy, especially the Asian nations. So as far as I understand, the question is whether there is this, I would use terrible words, segregation, like dirty fuels for the growing nations, clean energy for the developed nations. Do you see anything like that happening?
Well, I think it's a very interesting question. I mean, look at the United States, amount of oil that they consume every day, the largest consumer of oil on the planet, number one, and also the largest producer. And yet, when you hear their leader, all they talk about is renewable energy. That's some of the largest companies are from the United States, especially the companies in hydrocarbons. Now, the point here is that when you are that, you have achieved your energy independence, but that you've been working for years now. America is probably one of the very few countries which today is energy independent. They no longer lead the Middle East. Their dependence on Middle East is no longer very, very critical. It's not. Now, the question is that they have done for themselves. They consume maximum oil in the world. And yet, if you do what you do in terms of whether you're importing oil from one country or you're consuming or the way you're consuming or you're not doing according to them enough in terms of the transition, they come and give you long lectures. They actually issue you threats. If you're too small and too weak in Africa somewhere, they twist your arm and force you to sign Paris climate deal and this deal, that. Yes, that happens. Now, this is the reality. That's what I'm saying, democratization. So in the United States, I think, and at the same time, look at their strategic reserves. Why do they maintain these reserves for 90 days? Huge, massive security. You are so concerned about your economic security, your climate security, your energy security, and your military security. But if I'm a small country in Africa or in Asia, you don't allow me that right. Why? Because I'm small, because I'm poor, because I look different. What is this? What kind of global system we are talking about? Look at the United Nations, for instance. Because they have created something called the United Nations. Now, look at the United Nations. Out of the 5 permanent members, because that's the United Nations, the organization that matters most is the Security Council. In the Security Council, look at the 5 permanent members. 5 permanent members, 3 of these members are from Europe. 3. France, Britain, and Russia. And look at the size of economy of all these 3 countries. Look at Russia, half in terms of the size. India is today 4 trillion. Russia is roughly 50% of that. Look at France, smaller than India. Britain looks more like the economy is not doing very well. I don't want to call them a developing country, but they have a lot of challenges. Now, all these 3 countries in Europe, they are much smaller than India in terms of the size of economy. India is not in, India is out, India is not a member, India is not allowed to become a member, but these 3 European countries are there. And then you have got, of course, the United States and China. Now, this is the most important security organization in the world, Security Council. If tomorrow we are attacked by aliens, or the entire world, for instance, we face some kind of, a global disaster in terms of climate or energy or something, I think the issue is going to go to the Security Council to take the final call. What do we do? As one word, it will be the United Security Council. Now, and we are not a member. Africa is not a member. Latin America is not there. So roughly, these countries are not members. So we need to start from there. Who is opposing, for instance, a modernization of the United Nations Security Council, restructuring it? Who is against it? You know the answer. Most of you know the answer. So we can start from there. And the same goes for the, climate summit. Why can't countries of Asia and Africa, Latin America, they create their own climate summit? And they look at, for instance, climate with a concern. As I said, climate, there is no debate on that. Everybody's on the same page. We need to do something. But how do we do it? I think Asia, Africa, and Latin America, they need to put their head together and look at all this issue. How do we do it in our way, with our characteristics? And how can we be together so that when we sit down with them in these COP summits, we can be a little bit more forceful. I mean, I know there have been some activities, there have been some efforts in that direction, but evidently not sufficient. So what I'm saying is, when we look at the global energy landscape, you have to look at climate at the same time parallelly. And when we do all that, there are so many challenges and there's so many issues that we need to address before we can say that, look, all right, the transition is going to be by 2050, we'll get there 70%. That's how the global north looks at it. But I think it's simplistic, it's not democratic, and therefore it's not sustainable and will not get there. 2050 or 2070, we will not get there. It's important to get there with this feeling in every mind that it has happened in a very fair manner, the right manner, without no compromises on energy security, no compromises when it comes to energy poverty. So I think we have to, at the same time, who is debating that? Where are the platforms? Where are the organizations? Where are the people who are actually even working on these matters in a more scientific manner? Majority of think tanks are in the West, and they are doing what they are doing because they are funded by their governments, majority of them, or other organizations. So that's what I say, we need a global organization, and where, for instance, the global South can have, I'm not saying bigger or smaller, can have a say which is needed so that we can build pathways for the future, which are based on energy justice, which are based, on energy security, not only for the global North, not only for Europe, but for the entire world.
Narendra, your message about the new international organization on energy has created a lot of feedback, and lots of questions. So as we are approaching to the end of our conversation, I will ask 3 questions. I will transfer to you 3 questions from our audience about this international organization. Question from Maria: are there any existing international institutions that are potent to resolve this problem and to become such a global organization? Question from Martin: how effective and useful are regional Indo-Pacific organizations such as Shanghai Cooperation Organization, RCEP, APEC, ASEAN, and the others in promoting stronger voice of the Indo-Pacific in the global energy order and in creating regional conference of energy goals, given the challenge of creating an international organization that satisfies everyone's interests? And finally, a question from Jin Sok, which I've also wanted to ask. Do you think BRICS is an organization which will play a role in this, or what do you think about this specific organization which has a meeting right now in Kazan?
Yeah, interesting. Now, I'll start with first, is there any kind of existing organization which could be expanded and International Energy Agency based in Paris? It seems that they have that ambition, and they're trying to get both China and India are associate members, but they are trying, so that India and China can become members. At the same time, when you look at their constitution, unless you're a member of OECD, you cannot be a full-fledged member of IEA. So which means that India and China will never be the member. Even if they become associate member or another category they create for them, I think they will still have to sit out in the lounge, not in the main room. So countries like India and China, 3 billion people sitting in the lounge, What kind of global organization are we talking about? And moreover, the DNA of International Energy Agency is OECD countries. And actually, if you look at the DNA very carefully, it's actually oil, because it was created in response to the 1970s crisis, oil crisis. So therefore, I think the effort they're trying to do is commendable, but I don't think that's actually would be acceptable to majority of countries. Or even if they succeed in somehow pushing it through, that it would actually be what the world actually needs. What we need is a fresh organization with fresh ideas based on the ground reality of the modern times, of this century, this age, and this should be ideally be located somewhere in this part of the world, in Indo-Pacific or Asia-Pacific region. With no offense to the global north, it's just that because that's where the majority of energy consumers are. And there is unfortunately no existing organization. There are several that which, for instance, if we could be expanded, I think it would be much better instead of having an ancient building or an old building, trying to make it like the most modern building on the planet. Is better to create a new one, because that would require much more efforts, and you can't demolish that. You can't demolish any of the existing organization. That would not be polite, for instance, anybody to say it. At least I would never ever say that, because they serve their own purpose in their own way and for their members. Now, coming to regional organizations, you talk about SCO, you talk about other organization in our part of the world. Majority of these organizations focuses more political, geopolitical, and broadly economic, not really energy. Energy is a part of it, but not really. Look at SCO, since you talked about SCO. SCO is anchored by China, is based in Shanghai, as the name says. It has got India as a member, Pakistan is a member, and other countries are a member. It's a very good organization, and India is a very active member of that. Our foreign minister was in Pakistan recently, participating in this summit in Islamabad, and so it has its own agenda, and it's doing very well. And we think they are doing a great job. Other organizations in Asia Pacific, in their own way, including ASEAN, they are doing a good job. But energy, look at the challenge of energy climate is so massive, and it requires certain expertise, which you will not find in general organizations that, for instance, my friend talked about. It would not be possible. So therefore, it's much better we create an organization which has got energy in its DNA, and which is actually a modern organization, in sync with the ground realities, with the new challenges, and which is an organization which will serve the world for the rest of the century. Therefore, I think that's how it should be. There should be many new things. For instance, in the organization, you make sure the younger people are given more participation. A new organization can make sure from the day one that 50% employees are going to be women, stuff like that. So I think which is modern in true sense of the term, and kind of, well rooted in the new realities. Coming to BRICS, I think this is a very important question. But you see, BRICS is a very important organization. As you can see, if you switch on your television, this very important summit is happening, and there's so many great leaders participating in all that. I don't think that BRICS is a challenge to the West. As I've seen many reports in the media, Western media, some really highly reputed publications. I read them, I respect them, that they look upon BRICS as a kind of challenge to the West, a rival, threatening the West. But there is no such thing. BRICS is an organization. By the way, the idea of BRICS came from the West. It was an investment banker who conceived the whole idea. So, and then later on, it of course was implemented. Today, BRICS is what BRICS is, and it's only gaining more strength and everything. But BRICS is basically an organization which is conveying one important message: that the existing organizations, the United Nations, World Bank, and all these, they were not moving fast enough. They were not really responding to the aspirations of the people in global South in particular, or in countries like India and China and Argentina and UAE and all that, Iran. And so BRICS is a kind of basically a manifestation that the world is crying for a new world order, which is kind of more just, which is more fair, where countries the larger population or the countries which are economically very important are allowed to play the role that they should ideally be playing. So it's the manifestation that, let me give you an example. Today, if you put all BRICS countries together, look at the size of the economy. They're bigger than G7, bigger. And when you look at, for instance, among the fastest growing economies, majority of these economies are actually in member of the BRICS, and BRICS is only growing. So BRICS is not against anybody. That's a wrong thing. BRICS is a very important platform and is going to be even more important. It's become a platform of all those countries, all those people with ambitions, and the country will think that they can play even a bigger role, and they should be allowed to play a bigger role in global affairs, so that we can together build organizations, we can build intergovernmental organization, global systems, global orders, which are kind of more in sync with the new realities. Let me give you an example of the bank that BRICS has created, new development bank. It's doing very well. It's doing very, very well. And I think, because the World Bank was not moving from it. For instance, if you want in World Bank, you can't be president unless you're an American citizen. The new president is an Indian by origin, but he's an American citizen. So what kind of global organization is this, where you have to be an American citizen to sit in the cockpit? So they should have changed it. Even today, it's not too late. They should actually reconstruct, global organizations like World Bank and IMF and so on and so forth. So what is happening since the West is against it? So there is this is a manifestation. There is a kind of spawn from these countries. Some of these countries are great civilizations, great economies. They're going to be among the largest economies on the planet, and they're full of smart people, full of smart universities, think tanks, science labs, and everything. They think, all right, how about if we sit across the table, we create our own platform, and we try to kind of see what can we do for the world and for our own interest. That's what BRICS is doing. Look at, for instance, United Arab Emirates is a member now. Iran is a member now, and the other countries are soon going to be members. So I think it's a great organization. And if the West thing is a threat, I think they're getting it completely wrong. BRICS is not a threat to anybody. BRICS is an organization of all these billions of people who come together. They have their own dreams. They have their own way of looking at the world. It's important that people in the West, they recognize it and co-opt and say, hey, how can we come together? I would like to see President of America, President of France, Chancellor of Germany go and attend BRICS Summit, not necessarily as a member, as guests, so that they can understand what their aspirations are, what their dreams are, how they are looking at the world. Instead of saying BRICS is anti-West. How can BRICS be anti-West? I mean, India is a member of it. Is India anti-West? India is not. India is very close to the West. We have great relationship with America, great relationship. We have deep relationship with the United States, with Western Europe. We love the West. At the same time, we have great friends. Russia is a great friend. China is a friend, despite we have problems with them. China is not an enemy. China can be a problem, maybe, can be an issue sometime, but China is not an enemy. We talk together, you see. And the same goes for Indonesia, same goes for many other countries, tomorrow's countries in Africa. This century belongs to Africa. By 2050, both India and China, the new large economies, will peak. And even India and China will need Africa to sustain their growth. The world as a whole will need Africa to sustain growth. So this century belongs to Africa, not Asia, as some people say. So therefore, this is the new world. We have got BRICS, and I think, tomorrow there may be some other organizations too. So it's important to call an organization like BRICS that you are anti-West, you are a threat, and all that. I don't think that's the healthy way of looking at the world, and I think it will be great to see if some top leaders and thinkers, they come and attend BRICS meeting and say, hey, are there some new ideas? How can we work together? How can we restructure the United Nations? How can we create a new organization for energy? How can we create a new world order, especially for energy, because there is nothing left, and energy today is probably the biggest challenge the humankind is facing. So I think that's what we need to do. I mean, instead of saying that, look, if you are SCO, you are this, you are BRICS, you are doing. So BRICS is actually, if you look at the name very carefully, it's a very solid brick. And I think it's a very good for humanity. It's a great organization. And I think BRICS and other countries, if you have any doubt, ask for invitation, go and attend it as an observer. And I'm sure that you will understand that it is not anti-West, it's not against anyone, it's only for the people, only for the, these billions of people who are member of it. They're just trying to look at world differently. They're just trying to build world differently. And what is wrong with it? Do you think only the West has the license to do it? And if that is the case, who gave them the license?
Absolutely true. And I mean, we are all talking about diversity and inclusion, but sometimes it's necessary to have it on the global scale as well. Yeah, and this, I mean, your call for this energy justice and diversity and inclusion of different paths towards energy transition, I think it's very fair. And given the reaction of the audience, I think there are many people around the world who supported or at least started to think about it. Yeah, so thank you so much for your time, for sharing your views, because it's very thought-provoking, that's for sure. And I hope that one day these thoughts will materialize into this international energy organization, which will represent all the countries and all the views and all the perspectives. So Narendra, thank you so much once again.
Thank you.
That was fascinating discussion.
Thank
and I will enforce all our audience, please subscribe, don't miss our next events. You can write your comments and I will transfer them to Narendra afterwards, and let's stay tuned. So thank you so much. And goodbye.
Thank you, and thanks for having me.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.